Who's going to be the Republican candidates for the next election?
Look, if I had to put money on a candidate right now, I think Donald Trump, by all stretches of the imagination, is the only viable candidate at this point. There's some X factors and a lot of time to go. But I think when you look at what it takes to become the nominee, it's about accumulating the requisite number of delegates. And right now, Trump has a massive advantage on that.
Can you try and explain to our slightly skeptical listeners in the UK, Sean, how is that possible? The guy who orchestrated the riot on the Capitol, the guy who won't accept the result, the guy who tried to overturn the result, the guy who's got all these legal cases against him. How is it possible that he's still the front runner to be the Republicans' candidate?
Well, I think there's two questions you're asking, Matt. One is, first, how is it possible? One is in the way the system works is that primarily you go through a bunch of the early states, then we go to a Super Tuesday. So you look at Iowa's going to be the first state, then New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. If you win those first four states, it's almost impossible for somebody to catch up. Now, I'm not saying he's going to win all four, but right now he's got a lead of anywhere from 20 to 35, 40 points in each of those early states. We've got plenty of time between now and next, January and February for somebody to make a run at him. But if you're this far out and you've got that kind of a lead over 50%, meaning it's not a plurality, you've got a majority of the voters in those states, then I think that says it. To the broader point of your question, I think what a lot of people forget who aren't conservative grassroots voters is that Trump came to office, and a lot of people were very skeptical of his credentials. He had been a former Democrat. He had voiced support for a lot of liberal causes, but he became probably one of the greatest conservative leaders in terms of achievements that the movement's ever seen. 3 Supreme Court justices that stood up for life, building the border wall, being strong against immigration, renegotiating trade deals that he didn't think were fair, cutting taxes. I mean, these are all things that had been part of conservative orthodoxy. And for a lot of conservatives, for years been told, well, here's why we can't do something. Trump got it all done in 4 years. And a lot of them are saying, well, if he got that done in 4, I'm willing to overlook a lot to get 4 more years of that.
It does seem like one of the great sort of paradoxes in a way of Donald Trump. He achieved things, permanent things, which, lots of people pass through politics. They don't ever sort of achieve anything in their name, whether it's domestically or, tilting back the British, the US approach to China, some of what he did on the world stage. But it's interesting that there is that split between the people who can only see the good and the people who can only see the bad. There doesn't seem to be much overlap.
That's right. I mean, we've definitely become a very, very polarized nation. But I think what's helping Trump is the contrast, right? You look at the economy. When Trump left office, inflation was about 1%. It's reached record levels here in the United States, which makes us feel everything. We've had people flowing over our southern border, people who are on the terrorist watch list coming into the country. I mean, the levels of illegal immigration has hit epic proportions. You've seen a culture shift that I've never seen in my lifetime occur in this kind of quickness. You look at foreign policy, you mentioned it. You realize Putin didn't invade or annex another country for the first time in a presidency since Putin came onto the world stage. You look at North Korea, Iran, China. Gosh, I apologize to Japan. Yeah. But you look at all these countries being much more provocative. We are a much more unstable nation since Trump left office. So Joe Biden, the guy who came to office claiming to be the healer, the uniter, the person who had the foreign policy experience to build back relationships, has gone completely in the opposite way. And for a lot of Americans on a daily basis, they watch Biden and they don't think he's up to the job because of how old he is and whatever. And it's not like he's passing the torch to the next generation as he said he would as a candidate. So I think for those reasons, I think a lot of people wrongly focus on style versus then the substance, because if you look objectively at Trump versus Biden, I think that even some skeptics are willing to concede that Trump actually had the country moving in a much better direction. They just may not have liked him personally or stylistically.
How does it make you feel as an American and a Democrat, sort of with a small d Democrat, that someone like Donald Trump could become president behave in the way that he did, leave office in the manner that he did, and still be a favorite to return there? And what does that tell you about the state of America, the state of democracy in America?
So there's two things that come to mind. Number one, we've had a lot of great orators and campaigners who have sought or become president. I mean, I think Barack Obama, regardless of what you might think of him, was an excellent at giving speeches, and he was an excellent orator. He could go out and captivate an audience and get them to buy in. The whole notion of hope when he first ran, a lot of people bought into it. And I think he was a disaster as a president in terms of the policies. Even for a lot of conservatives, I worked in the Bush administration. I have a lot of admiration for George W. Bush, but in terms of some of the deals that he cut, I don't know that they were the most conservative. He expanded government in a lot of ways that I don't wholly agree with. Now, does that mean he's a bad person? No. But I think that when you're asking, and this gets back to the question of what do you think? I think the question sort of comes down, do you want a lot of rhetoric or do you want results? Because at the end of the day, it is a continuum. You can get the rhetoric and not like the results. I mean, Joe Biden came in saying he was going to be the unifier. He was going to care about people who didn't vote for him as much as he has. That's completely not true. He has, on a variety of topics, misled the country. And so the question is, do you want the happy talk or do you want results? And I think, in a perfect world, I would say we would love both, but that's not how the world works. And I think it's like when people say, well, if you were 6'10", would you play basketball for a living? And if that's great, but we don't have those choices. We're given certain choices, and certain people have flaws and accomplishments and things that make them great attributes. So you have to make a choice as to what your priorities are.
You mentioned you didn't think George W. Bush was a bad person. Do you think Donald Trump's a bad person?
No, I think do I think a lot of people think he is, and do a lot of people have bad experiences? Yes, but that's not how I judge people. I judge people on the experiences that I've had with them. In his case, he's been a good friend and supportive. I've watched some other people. I understand why they may not share that view. But I think that there are people that I know around. Frankly, I don't even want to make it about every politician. I mean, look, there are people that I know don't like me. I understand that. I respect it. I wish it weren't the case. But I know that I'm loved by a lot of people, my family, my friends. And are there things that Donald Trump does that I don't agree with sometimes, or language that he uses? Yes. But I guarantee you, if you ask the same of almost every person outside of some saints, you'll have a similar feeling that, the question is, where's that continuum? I would rather be closer to the 80 or 90% of people that like me that don't for the right reasons than, maybe say towards the 50. But, that's the way the world works.
I wanted to ask you, back in 2017, not long after you left the White House, I think, you said, when and if Mike Pence runs in 2024, I would proudly play any role he asks. Yeah. He's now said this week he's running. Are you going to play a part?
Wow, you did your research. I don't think anybody foresaw the circumstances where you'd be facing off against President Trump. I think if President Trump had finished his second term, then I think Mike Pence would have a case to be made. I just don't see that case right now.
So would you work for Trump? Would you work for Trump again?
No, and it's not personal. I in fact was having this conversation earlier today with somebody. I've been in politics and government for 30 years, almost 30 years. I finally got to a place where I can spend more time with my family. I've actually, made a little bit more money than I did in government. I've served my time, 24 years in the military, several terms serving people in Congress, time in the White House. It is time to pass the baton to other folks who are willing to take that on. But will I support him? Yeah. I'm just not. I'm not going to put my family through that ordeal again.
You strike me as a man, Sean. You're amazingly forgiving, given everything you went through. right from the sort of the inauguration and the argument about the size of the crowds and the alternative facts, and you rode that very short-lived wave, and then in for a time with you were the punchline to everything, having because of your association with Donald Trump. You're quite a forgiving man. Other people might not be quite so fair to the guy who landed you in all of that.
Well, I think there's a few things. One, there is a degree of personal responsibility. I wasn't, it wasn't a prison sentence. So you have to take responsibility for the choices you make. No one forced me to do those things. Meaning, I chose to serve. I don't think I clearly understood the full, what it would lead to. I had been watching different press secretaries and different people for quite some time. Nobody's had that experience that I did. But number two is, I would just say, as a Christian, we're taught to forgive people. So that's pretty much my nature, to the point of your question. And number three is, I would just say that there's more to a lot of the stories than a lot of people are willing to accept. And I've written a book called The Briefing, where I try to lay out a lot of that, because I don't think people want to believe how certain events occurred. Sometimes there's more truth than not, but a lot of these stories that have made for great folklore are not based entirely in fact. And I think the problem is, and that's why I'm saying that I think people go, how did you forget? It's like, well, if they weren't the ones responsible for the incident or the event, then it's hard to blame them for something. But I think that there is a media narrative that somehow wants to put the blame on Donald Trump for everything that went wrong, when there are people I do blame for certain things. But I will also say this lastly, is that one of the qualities that I think is important in people, and I've tried to live my life by, is one of loyalty. When people give you a position of trust, and that's not just a job, Matt. I mean, that's being a good coworker, being a good friend. If you betray that trust and that loyalty, then I think then you're not particularly a person that I would want to hang out with. And so if you, I was just gonna say, so if you go back to my career, this isn't just about Donald Trump. I think I've worked for a lot of different folks over my 50 plus years. Some haven't been the greatest experiences, some better than others, but I believe that each one of them deserves a degree of loyalty because they brought you in a position of trust.
Final question then, which is sort of the exam question of what we're talking about today. Who is going to be the Democrat and Republican candidate at the next election, and who do you think will win?
Well, right now, I mean, look, I think you have to go with what you know, and what you know is that Trump, in terms of the delegate math and how it's all laying out, he is by far the front runner. Is there a path for Ron DeSantis? Yes. I believe that he or any other candidate needs to knock Trump off in one or two of the first early states. That's New Hampshire, Iowa, Nevada, or South Carolina. If you can't do that, you head into Super Tuesday. I don't see any way you can be stopped. On the Democratic side, look, Joe Biden is the nominee, despite some opposition from people like Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who's now at 20-something%. They're shutting out any discussion. So, like, barring some event, I mean, Trump's got some legal issues. There's some health issues on Biden's standpoint. If those things prohibit them, then that's the X factors, and you can never predict the X factors. But if you were a betting person today, those are the two people I'd put money on.
And who wins in that battle? A rerun of the last time of 2020?
So, look, right now I would give Trump a small edge. But the one thing that I've learned over 30 years of doing campaigns is mechanics matter. Getting out that vote. You saw the Republican National Committee in the last 24 hours have talked about this new project to, quote, bank your vote. They are really welcoming this idea of early voting that a lot of Republicans have been apprehensive about embracing. I don't particularly like it, meaning I'm a same day voter kind of guy, but I understand that if we're going to win, we have to adapt. Yeah. So the question is, mechanically, look, if you go back over several cycles, we are running close elections when it terms of electoral votes and what it takes in each of these states. I mean, 2016, I think Michigan was 10,000 votes. So I think the answer to your question is, tell me some mechanical issues that are happening in that week leading up to the election. I can tell you who wins, but barring that, it's going to be tight.